Page 39. Question 5. But above all, Sir Anthony, she should be mistress of orthodoxy, that she might not misspell and mispronounce words so shamefully as girls usually do, and likewise that she might reprehend the true meaning of what she is saying. Here Mrs. Malaprop gives her ideal of female education. In stating her view, she ridiculously misuses words. She means that a woman should be well acquainted with orthography, that is, the art of correct spelling, so that she may not misspell or mispronounce words. The girls nowadays misuse and mispronounce words shamelessly. Mrs. Malaprop further warns that the girls must understand the true meaning of words. Here Mrs. Malaprop uses words wrongly. She uses orthodoxy to mean orthography and reprehend to mean comprehend. Her bungling in the use of words proves that women should not have high education, for learning only confuses their intellect. Act 2. 6. You throw for large stake, but losing you could stake, and throw again. But I have set my sum of happiness on this cast, and not to succeed were to be stripped of all. Scene 1. Falkland says this to Absolute when the latter charges him with a farrago of doubts, fears, and wishes. Absolute is a romantic lover, but he is not a prey to doubts and fears. His mind is not filled with light and frivolous sentiments. Falkland attempts to support his whimsicality by the argument that his heart is centered on one lover and he is easily upset by sentimental fancies and fears. Absolute, on the other hand, has too many irons in the fire of love. Absolute is a pluralist. Captain Absolute must have had several love affairs in the past, his latest being that with Lydia. Moreover, Absolute is batting very high in the game. He is aspiring after a great object, that is, getting Miss Lydia Languish as his beloved. If he fails to gain the love of Lydia, he can make another attempt elsewhere. He can look forward to some other venture of love. But Falkland has placed all his hopes of happiness on this chance. All his happiness depends upon gaining Julia's love. If he fails to win Julia's love, he will be deprived of all happiness. Falkland describes Absolute as an adventurer in love, while he is single-minded in his devotion to one lady. He uses the language of dicing. 7. That she has indeed, then she is so accomplished, so sweet a voice, so expert at her harpsichord, such a mistress of flat and sharp, squallant, rumblant, and quiverant. There was this time month, odds, minims, and crotchets. How she did chirrup at Mrs. Piano's concert. This is from Scene 1. Bob Acres is introduced by Captain Absolute to Falkland as the lover of Miss Melville Julia. Acres begins to enjoy some fun at the expense of Falkland. He teases him by retailing information regarding the health and spirit of Julia in the absence of her lover. He says that in the name of God she has been as cheerful as a cricket. She is the reigning beauty and the centre of cheerfulness and vivacity. She is cultured and she has a musical voice. She is skilful in playing on the harpsichord. She has skilfully acquired all the musical notes, high and low. She has got them within a month. She makes cheerful sounds like a bird when Mrs. Piano plays the concert. Page 40. Bob Acres gets mischievous merriment by teasing Falkland. He shows his knowledge and accomplishments. He uses musical terms and makes his own coinages in imitation of the Italian musical vocabulary. He swears whenever strong emotions are to be expressed. Harpsichord means an old-fashioned musical instrument with keys and strings akin to the spinet from which, during the 18th century, the pianoforte was developed. Flat and sharp, these are musical terms. Flat is below the pitch and sharp above the pitch. Squallant, rumblant, and quiverant, these are musical terms of Acres's own coinage in imitation of the Italian musical vocabulary. They mean squalling, rumbling, and quivering. Minims and crotchets are musical notes, minims being notes of half the value and crotchets notes of quarter the value of a semibreve. Mrs. Piano's concert is probably an invented name. 8. Oh, she thrives in my absence, dancing, but her whole feelings have been in opposition with mine. I have been anxious, silent, pensive, sedentary. My days have been hours of care, my nights of watchfulness. She has been all health, spirit, laugh, song, dance. Oh, damned levity. This is from Scene 1. Falkland has been teased out of patience by the remarks of Bob Acres about the health and happiness of Julia, his beloved, in his absence at Bath. Falkland makes himself ridiculous by his contradictory speeches and behavior on hearing the remarks about Julia. He revolts at the very idea of his beloved making herself so cheap as to sing common love songs amid a group of listeners. When Absolute says that as a lover he should be happy at the happiness of his beloved, Falkland realizes that he is making a fool of himself by his sentimental manner of talk. He now wants to amend his conversational method and put on an air of cheerfulness. But he cannot check his annoyance when Bob Acres speaks of her ball dance. He falls into a frenzy. He says that she is gay and bright when he is away from her. Her feelings and sentiments never agree with his. He is anxious and sad. His days have been passed in care. His nights have been passed in sleeplessness. He has been worried and anxious while she has been enjoying the best of health. She is laughing, singing, and dancing. He condemns her frivolity and gaiety. Thus Falkland is showing up his capriciousness and jealous nature in disgraceful manner. He is a typical sentimental lover who is suspicious, jealous, and always finds the cause of doubts and fears about his beloved. He is indeed a farrago of doubts and fears, as Captain Absolute says about him. Sheridan is making fun of a sentimental lover. 9. The ancients would never stick to an oath or two, but would say, by Jove, or by Bacchus, or by Mars, or by Venus, or by Pallas, according to the sentiment, so that to swear with propriety, says my little Major, the, quote, oath should be an echo to the sense, unquote, and this we call the oath referential, or sentimental swearing. Ha ha ha. 'Tis genteel, isn't it? This is from Scene 1. Bob Acres here takes pride in his use of a new kind of oaths. Captain Absolute appreciates his new method of swearing, and he is encouraged to speak of it at great length. The ordinary oaths have become stale and obsolete. There is no freshness in them. The old and conventional oaths are still popular, not for any intrinsic beauty in them, but only because of the fact that they are very ancient. Page 41. The old people would not follow uniform method of swearing by one or two names. They would swear by Jupiter, Bacchus, Mars, Venus, Pallas, in accordance with the nature of the feeling to be expressed. Bob Acres refers to his major as saying that the oath should be distinct expression of the idea to be conveyed. Acres now explains his new method of swearing. The oath referential means the oath that has a direct reference to the idea to be expressed. Quote, sentimental swearing means swearing in accordance with the feeling that inspire him. Sentimental is here used in the sense of elevated. Bob swears by peculiar things, even by frogs and tambours. Bob Acres shows that he has acquired the sophisticated manners of the fashionable society. He shows to Captain Absolute that he is an eminently suitable candidate for the hand of Lydia. If he can find out Ensign Beverley, he will show his superiority to him in dress and fashions. 10. I'll strip you of your commission. I'll lodge a 5 and 3 pence in the hands of trustees, and you shall live on the interest. I'll disown you. I'll disinherit you. I'll unget you, and damn me if I ever call you Jack again. This is from scene 1. This is a part of the quarrel between Sir Anthony Absolute and Captain Absolute over the choice of bride for Captain Absolute. Anthony Absolute is a dictatorial father who will impose his choice on the son. Captain Absolute says to his father that his heart is engaged to another girl. Anthony Absolute argues that if by marrying the girl of his father's choice he is to lose his life's happiness, he must express his definite unwillingness to marry. Anthony Absolute says, like a tyrannical father, that he will not entertain any excuse from him. He must marry the girl of his choice. Absolute argues very politely and patiently, but Anthony Absolute gets excited and angry. He says that his son must marry any girl if she is ugly, to his father's choice. Anthony sees passion in his son, although Captain Absolute is very cool and patient. In his anger, Anthony makes himself ridiculous by attributing temper and passion to his son, and by boasting of his own qualities. He says that Captain Absolute is haughty because he is mild. He takes so much liberty in his dealings because he is polite. But he becomes fierce when his wishes are thwarted. He asks his son not to live in the same world with him. He will deprive him of his military service. He will disown him and will make him live on the interest of a meagre deposit. The whole speech shows the white heat of Sir Anthony's temper. He makes a fool of himself by his wild and excited speech. In this frenzied speech, he descends even to the level of clownage. His son's patience and coolness is a contrast to the wildness and excitement of the father. The more his son speaks in a cool manner, the more he gets excited. He finds passion and anger in his son and calls him a hypocritical dog. 11. Yet I will make you ogle her all day and sit up all night to write sonnets on her beauty. This is from scene 1. Context same as before. Sir Anthony Absolute says here that his son must accept the bride his father chooses for him. Page 42. The bride may be ugly. She may have fleshy growth on each shoulder. She may be in a stooping shape like the royal crescent at Bath. Her one eye may move restlessly and circularly, like the bull in an exhibition of curiosities opened in Bond Street by James Cox. But his son must accept her and look at her with amorous glances. He must keep awake for the whole night and celebrate her beauty in verses. Sir Anthony has visibly lost control over himself and speaks wild and whirling words. Act 3. 12. Her eye shall be the Promethean torch to you. Come along. I'll never forgive you if you don't come back stark mad with rapture and impatience. If you don't, egad, I'll marry the girl myself. Scene 1. In this scene, father and son meet again. Captain Absolute has come to know that the intended bride of his father's choice is no other than his beloved Lydia. He therefore plays the penitent boy to the father. Sir Anthony at first retains his angry posture, but gradually he relents at the obedience of his son. Captain Absolute plays the hypocrite with consummate art. Anthony Absolute waxes eloquent in his description and analysis of the girl's beauty. He says that the girl has eyes which will give animation or life to him. The eyes of the girl will have the effect of rousing the dominant passions of his heart. After the visit to the place, his son will come back completely mad with the ecstasy of feelings for the lady. He himself feels like marrying the girl. The conversation of father and son seems to be over-frank. The description of the girl's charms in an amorous language by the father to his son is astonishingly indecent. But we must remember the spirit of the 18th century morality and also the comic nature of the whole drama before we pass any ungenerous remark. 13. I should be ashamed to see her now. I'll wait till her just resentment is abated, and when I distress her so again, may I lose her forever, and be linked instead to some antique virago, whose gnawing passions and long-hoarded spleen shall make me curse my fully half the day and all the night. This is from Scene 2. Falkland meets Julia in her dressing room. Falkland is self-critical and penitent. Julia assures him that she had no joy and peace of mind in his absence. She expresses the greatest surprise that the wild and irresponsible reports of a silly bore should so influence his mind that he has serious doubts about her constancy to him. Falkland gives out the insinuation that Julia has probably mistaken, quote, the cold dictates of prudence, gratitude, or filial duty, unquote, as, quote, the pleadings of heart, unquote. This slight hint is too much for tender Julia. She feels that Falkland is determined to be unkind and insulting to her. So she leaves the room with tearful eyes. After her departure, Falkland realizes the gravity of his sentimental and unguarded speeches regarding her. He repents of his trifling with the sincerity of Julia. He knows that if he distresses her again, he will lose her. He should be rather linked to some old and quarrelsome woman whose torturing passions and accumulated temper will make him curse his folly always. He here appreciates the good nature of Julia, who endures all the tortures and insults. If he is attached to a turbulent woman, she will always quarrel with him and abuse him, and then he will know his folly and curse himself. Page 43. Falkland is a sentimental lover. He is something of a milksop. He whines and sighs. He loses Julia's love for his over-anxiety to retain it. Here he feels the nemesis of his sentimentalism. 14. There, sir, an attack upon my language. What do you think of that? an aspersion upon my parts of speech? Was ever such a brute? Sure, if I reprehend anything in this world, it is the use of my circular tongue, and a nice derangement of epitaphs. This is from scene 3. Captain Absolute sees Mrs. Malaprop with a letter of introduction from his father. He is received very warmly by Mrs. Malaprop. Mrs. Malaprop discloses to him all about the Lydia Beverley affair. In one of the letters, Beverley has made uncharitable remarks about Mrs. Malaprop, the guardian of Lydia. He has called her, quote, the old weather-beaten she-dragon, unquote. He has harshly commented on her language. She cannot stand the insulting comment on her language, on her grammar. She boasts that if she understands anything in this world, it is the use of her vernacular language and nice arrangement of words in a sentence. She takes pride in her power of language. Here is a fine example of malapropism. She uses reprehend to mean comprehend, oracular for vernacular, derangement for arrangement, and epitaphs for epithets. Her use of language is a condemnation of her learning. Mrs. Malaprop creates a lot of fun by her inappropriate words uttered with conceit and self-assuredness. 15. Oh, there's nothing to be hoped for from her. She is as headstrong as an allegory on the banks of Nile. Scene 2. Mrs. Malaprop overhears the conversation between Lydia and Captain Absolute. Absolute has come to see Mrs. Malaprop at the instance of his father. Lydia is the choice of his father as his bride. Thus he is happy that his beloved is his father's choice also. When Lydia meets Absolute in her house, she is astonished to see her Beverley there. Absolute explains that he has deceived her aunt and contrived to pass himself as Captain Absolute. Mrs. Malaprop overhears that Lydia is saying to Absolute that her aunt may choose Captain Absolute, but her choice will be Beverley. Mrs. Malaprop comes forward and apologizes to Captain Absolute for the shocking rudeness of her niece. She says that she is as obstinate as the alligator on the banks of Nile. Here Mrs. Malaprop uses a wrong word. She uses allegory to mean alligator. This is another example of malapropism. Here the situation is comically confusing. Captain Absolute and Ensign Beverley are the same person. Lydia makes love to him as Ensign Beverley, while Mrs. Malaprop treats him as Captain Absolute. 16. The thunder of your words has soured the milk of human kindness in my breast. Scene 4. Bob Acres says this when Sir Lucas asks him to challenge Captain Absolute to a duel in order to decide whose claim on Lydia is stronger. Bob Acres feels excited. He says that his inspiring words have hardened his heart and all his sympathy of nature is gone. Sir Lucius's words are strong and thrilling and have driven away the kindness that was latent in his nature. Page 44. The expression, the milk of human kindness, is from Macbeth. Quote, Yet do I fear thy nature. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness. Unquote. Act 4, 17. Then his presence is as noble. I protest, when I saw him, I thought of what Hamlet says in the play. Hesperian curls the front of Job himself, and I, like March, to threaten at command, a station like Harry Mercury, knew something about kissing on a hill, However, the similitude struck me directly. This is from scene 2. Mrs. Malaprop is praising the beauty and charm of Captain Absolute's appearance and learning. She does not know Beverley, yet she makes a comparison between Captain Absolute and Beverley. Captain Absolute is her choice for her niece, Lydia. She says about Captain Absolute that he is well-bred and full of smartness. She uses the language of Hamlet in describing him, but she misquotes the lines in which Hamlet describes his dead father, who, however, appears in a spirit form. Hamlet's language is, quote, Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars to threaten or command, a station like the herald Mercury, new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill. Mrs. Malaprop confuses Hyperion, the sun god, with Hesperion, which means of the evening star, Hesperus. Mrs. Malaprop confuses Job, a character of the Old Testament in the Bible, with Jove, the king of the gods, that is Jupiter. March is malapropism for Mars. Threaten at command conveys no sense. She really means threaten or command. Harry Mercury is a misquotation of Herald Mercury. Mercury, the divine messenger. Mrs. Malaprop gives an English name to a classical god, an absurd combination. Something about kissing. Mrs. Malaprop forgets the exact quotation and the context of the line, but remembers that something is said about kissing. This passage is an outstanding example of malapropism. It also shows Mrs. Malaprop's ludicrous attempt to display her knowledge. She is, however, self-assured and smug about her education. This contrast between what she thinks about herself and what she really appears to be constituted the humor of the character. 18. What the devil ails the fellow? Why don't you speak out? Not stand croaking like a frog in a quinsy? This is from scene 1. Mrs. Malaprop glorifies the character of Captain Absolute when Sir Anthony arrives with his son. Sir Anthony cannot tolerate Lydia's obstinacy in refusing his son. He asks his son to begin his address to Lydia. Captain Absolute is perplexed. He does not know how and where to begin his address. Lydia is astonished to see Ensign Beverley. She wonders that her aunt cannot detect the difference between the two persons, Captain Absolute and Ensign Beverley. They are both military men, and so the difference is not visible. Captain Absolute makes sign to Mrs. Malaprop to leave them together, but Sir Anthony would not leave the son alone in the company of Lydia, because he cannot trust his son. Sir Anthony asks his son to address Lydia. Captain Absolute speaks in a low voice. Page 45. Sir Anthony astonishes him and asks him to raise his voice. He asks what is troubling him. Why is he speaking nonsensical in a harsh, husky voice as if he has a sore throat or inflammation of the throat? This line shows how Sir Anthony is urging his son to pay courtship to the lady whom he has chosen as his son's bride. Sir Anthony is determined to impose his choice on the son. He cannot stand the obstinacy of the young ones. Captain Absolute is, however, in a perplexing situation. He is the Ensign Beverley of Lydia. If he reveals himself as Captain Absolute, he knows that this will be shocking disappointment to Lydia. The situation here is indeed very funny. 19. Now pray, who gets the profit of it? Why, my honour? But put the case that he kills me, by the mass, I go to the worms, and my honour whips over to my enemy. This is from scene 1. David says this to Bob Acres when the latter informs him of his intended fight with Beverley. Acres, incited by Sir Lucius Outrega is flaming with the rage to wreak revenge upon Ensign Beverley, his rival in love. David, his servant, is counseling personal safety. He is a man of practical common sense. Bob Acres, like a typical romantic hero, he assumes to be a hero. He is a real coward. Boasts that he must fight for honor. David compares honor to a courtier who is generally very treacherous in character. He is faithful and cringing to the king when the king is powerful and prosperous. But when the king falls from power or fortune, the faithful courtier withdraws all his devotion from the king. He asks who is benefited by the slaughter of a gentleman. One's honor gets the benefit if one kills one's rival, but if the rival kills the man, he is dead and buried, and his corpse will be eaten by worms. The honor then passes swiftly over to the enemy. David, a practical man, shows the vanity and hollowness of such concepts as honor. 28. Ah, you dissembling villain! What? Pointing to Lydia. She squints, don't she? A little red-haired girl? Hey, why, you hypocritical young rascal, I wonder you aren't not ashamed to hold up your head? This is from scene 2. Sir Anthony brings his son, Captain Absolute, to the house of Mrs. Malaprop and admonishes her for the obstinacy of her niece. Lydia and Absolute are left together, and Sir Anthony plays the eavesdropper in his son's courtship of Lydia. The situation is a tense one, and Captain Absolute can no longer keep up the disguise. He discloses his identity, and Lydia is shocked. She loses the prospect of a romantic elopement. Sir Anthony takes pride in his son's cleverness in the management of the love interview. He calls his son endearingly a hypocritical rogue. Lydia is casting an oblique glance. She is a red-haired girl. He wonders that his son does not hang his head in shame for his arrant hypocrisy. As a matter of fact, Sir Anthony lovingly rebukes his son and admires the latter's exceptional cleverness in conducting the whole affair of love with Lydia. Sir Anthony has a romantic side of his character. He appreciates his son's adventurous way of love-making. 21. There, madam, in beauty, that copy is not equal to you, but in my mind, its merit over the original in being still the same is such that I cannot find in my heart to part with it. Scene 2. Lydia is disappointed and rudely shocked when she comes to know that Captain Absolute is his lover, Ensign Beverley. Her romantic notion of, quote, love in a cottage, unquote, of elopement is rudely shaken. Lydia romantically dreamed that she would marry poor Ensign Beverley in defiance of the desire of her aunt, but her dream is dashed to the ground. She now sees that her choice, by a curious turn of events, has been approved of by her aunt. In disappointment and chagrin, the portrait of Ensign Beverley and throws it at him. She says that just as she is throwing the portrait to him, so is she banishing all thoughts of Ensign Beverley from her heart. Captain Absolute keeps his coolness and equable temper even at this provocation. He takes the portrait of Lydia and says that there is a world of difference between his attitude to Lydia's picture and Lydia's attitude to his. He still values the portrait. The divine smile that is preserved in the portrait inspired his love and hopes. The lips of the portrait confirm the pledge of love. This pledge has been recently recorded in the diary of Cupid, the young boy, son of Venus, the god of love. Her feeling of coyness would have checked him from expressing his love to her in passionate words, but all these are past. He admits that in respect of loveliness of features, the portrait cannot stand any comparison with her real beauty. Yet he cannot part with the portrait Captain Absolute means that the beauty of Lydia is superior to the beauty of the portrait. Even then he cannot part with the portrait, because the lovely features of the portrait will never undergo any change due to the effect of time or years. Here Captain Absolute expresses a romantic idea, almost Keatsian, that the beauty preserved in art is eternal, and therefore superior to the beauty of living woman.